Hi Minister, thanks for joining us, and it's really nice to be talking to you on International Women's Day because we're going to be talking about the environment, about electric cars, and they're two areas that women do have huge influence on.
Yeah, Ginny, well, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be on your website, and it's great to be sort of talking to another woman on International Women's Day about this important issue of the environment and how we all get around.
Yeah, there's so much happening, isn't there, as we head towards 2030, and you've got quite a key role in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a minister in the Department for Transport, and my role is quite a broad one, but I actually look after transport decarbonisation, which is basically how do we cut greenhouse gas emissions across all of transport, not just roads, but also actually aviation, flying, and maritime as well. So ships, boats, and of course roads as well, which includes more than just cars. Of course, it includes lorries, freight, buses, and of course the rail network. So it is quite broad. And I also look after the future of transport, which kind of means how do we think these trends are going to evolve in the future? How are things like driverless cars actually going to impact on people? It seems a bit out there, but some of these changes are sort of happening quite quickly actually in this space. So it's a really exciting role.
Now, one of your big focuses is, of course, on the ban of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars. And as we head to 2030, some really big changes ahead for the consumer. And you're going to be writing a blog for us, aren't you? Just to kind of let people know about what's happening with that. Just tell us about that. What kind of things are you going to be covering?
We're very much focused, I think, as we're coming out of COVID, on really building back better. And I think what that means for us is building back greener. So we know, as you said, there's a massive interest in the environment and people changing their lifestyles or adopting things that are going to help them have a positive impact on the environment. I think we've all seen that in COVID. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to write the blog. I'm going to be talking about some of the policies that we've got in government and also some of the work that we're doing to try and lead the world on this. We've got COP26. That's basically all of the signatories to the climate pledge coming together. And that's taking place in Glasgow. And ahead of that, we really want to set out our stall as a global leader on this. And that's actually, you mentioned 2030, the phase out of petrol and diesel cars and vans. And we are the first nation to have such an ambitious target. But we do believe it's achievable. But as you rightly say, there are lots of sort of obstacles along the way. And I want to talk about some of those in my blog and how we're going to tackle them together.
We're also going to be listening to people as well, aren't we? Because we're going to have this big survey that we're going to do. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea because we know we have to listen to people. Because what I want to do, particularly as an EV driver myself, of course, I switched to an electric vehicle just over a year ago, but I've already seen what it's actually like, the reality of the practicalities of driving an electric vehicle. And of course, people are telling me very often they're experiencing certain issues. And these are the issues that we want to tackle because we know that people want to switch to an electric vehicle or reduce their impact on the environment, but often there are practical reasons why they can't. So by listening to your huge audience that I know that you have who are engaged and interested, I know we can get some really useful feedback that we can use to develop our policy.
You're asking people to make a massive lifestyle change, aren't you? I know you said that you've made it. What were your concerns before you switched?
Well, I think it's right to say we are asking people to make a switch, but there's also a lot of support that we're putting in place to help people, whether it's in terms of grants, to help buy a car or to get a charge point installed at home, or to make sure that we've got the charging infrastructure in people's local areas. But I think even despite that, I mean, one of my main concerns, as I'm sure it is to anyone listening to this or watching this, is that how far will I be able to drive before my car runs out of juice? And will I actually be able to get to my sort of holiday destination in Scotland or Wales, or will I be able to get to see my parents or family members who live sort of 2 or 3 hours drive away? Those really practical challenges, and also around, you know, even if I do make it to that charge point, will it be working? So I want to really kind of hone in on these issues, and we have a lot of work going on inside government to address them directly in a very real practical way, and I very much hope that we can talk a bit more about those as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, before we've got the survey coming up, so we'll be able to address lots of issues when we see that and we see what people's concerns are. We've also been talking to social media, we've been talking to our users, and we've got quite a lot of questions. So I'm just going to kick off with some of the questions from our users. And of course, charging infrastructure, you're absolutely right. It comes up time and time again. So listen, let me just go through with one of them. Why can't you just turn up at a charger, no matter what company it is, and just tap a debit or a credit card to pay? I don't want to have their app. I don't want to have to sign up and wait for a card to turn up. What would you say to Nicola, who sent that one in?
Basically, Nicola, we completely agree with you. We want it to be as easy to charge your car as it is currently to buy a tank of petrol. So what we're doing at the moment is we've actually got a live consultation. So anyone who is interested, and hopefully you can perhaps post the link, we really welcome feedback just from members of the public as well about that consumer experience. What does the payment process look like? How can we make it easier for people? We don't believe it is right for people to have to sign up to multiple apps, and we want it to be easy and straightforward. And the reliability piece comes into that as well. So that is live work that we're doing, and we very much hope to see a lot of change coming into the market. I think it's sort of fair to say that this is quite an early market at the moment. Although EVs have been around for a while, they've not really been around in large numbers. So the market does need to mature. And as we see more private investment coming into it, I know that we're going to see big leaps forward in this space.
I think one of the big issues with charging infrastructure, and we've had, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 questions for you about this, is motorway charging. So it comes up time and time again. You know, it's often old equipment. It doesn't work all the time. It's not reliable. I mean, this is just, Rachel, one example of the questions we've had. Why does Ecotricity have a monopoly at the motorway service stations? They're always broken. They're a really bad advert for converting anyone to an electric car. I mean, I've experienced it as an electric car driver myself, turning up, not being able to access charging. I mean, I know you're aware of this issue. So what's happening about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, we do believe that it does take government investment to actually charge up this market, if you like, which is why we've got nearly £1 billion worth that we've committed to this, to upgrade those connections at motorway service stations. So what your drivers will see, and I very much hope that this is kind of going to go some way to alleviate their anxiety, we are going to have at least 6 high-powered charge points in every motorway service area by 2023, obviously reliable ones, but there'll also be rapid chargers, 150 kilowatt or above. So that means you should be able to charge your car in the time it takes to get a cup of coffee. And then beyond that, out to 2030, which is obviously when we're going to phase out the sale of new petrol and diesel cars, we are going to have around 6,000 rapid charge points across A roads and motorway service stations. It is worth saying that we have got a good charging network in this country at the moment. I mean, I know that people have got problems, but also I have had many trouble-free experiences. And I think the other point is that most people are charging their cars at home. We know that's the normal pattern. It's just those sort of one-off longer journeys that I absolutely agree. We need to make sure that people are not experiencing that worry or that range anxiety.
So who's going to run those rapid charges that you're talking about at all of the motorway service networks? Will they be part of the Ecotricity network, or will that be open to different suppliers?
Yeah, it will be open. We are not, it's basically, we want the private sector to come in. So we will be taking the best commercial offer from the private sector. I mean, it's worth saying that we're already seeing a massive amount of activity in this market, especially now we've set out as a government what our steps are. It makes it very attractive for them to come in and invest. So it is definitely going to drive an increase in performance. It's like any new market. When it's at its early stages, the product is just not that good. But as it becomes more competitive and there's a greater demand, it's going to improve. But obviously the government has to step in and help, which is what we're doing.
Have you been to GridServe yet? Have you managed to see the electric forecourt at GridServe?
Sadly not, but I know the Prime Minister has, and he was incredibly impressed. I very much hope that I can. But look, that's what we want. We want more. We want grid serves everywhere. You know, that's a great example of the kind of model that we expect to see absolutely everywhere when people are driving in their own local area.
And actually, you talking about these plans may address the next question that we've had in, which again came from a couple of people, mainly from women, saying, why are charging points in towns always in really dark car parks? You know, I don't always feel safe when I'm charging. There's very rarely cover from the elements. I mean, historically, it's because that was probably the convenient place to put charging points in, wasn't it? But how do you address this as well? Because, you know, we don't have to be in the dark and getting wet to fill our cars up with petrol, do we?
No, 100%. And that point about, are they sort of undercover, and that the physical experience of the location is also really important. That's something that we're looking at in this consumer experience consultation. But you're right. What we want to see is availability of charge points all across the country in people's local areas, and also for people who don't have their own drives or their own garages. So we have made quite a lot of money available. In fact, we've doubled the funding to local councils for them to install charging infrastructure. So, for example, on lampposts, on streets, or in other local areas that's convenient for people. So we want to see that being rolled out across the country. And what I would say to anyone who's listening to this who thinks, well, I haven't got one near my house, get in touch with your local council. We in the central government have made that money available. Some of it is not being spent, which is a real shame. So of course we work closely with local councils, but there is money sitting there for local councils. So get on and lobby your local council to get those charge points installed near you.
Yeah, I did a programme for ITV recently, and we did a freedom of information request around that and discovered that a lot of councils are not making use of that money. And actually, you know, it's leading in really nicely to, you know, questions that we've had. Somebody called the plug seeker is just one of the many who said, you know, those councils do have funding. Why are they not making use of it? And a suggestion that could you set targets perhaps for councils to make sure they get so many kilowatt hours installed?
Yeah, I think these are all really, really good questions, and it's a live discussion that we're having. Look, we know that councils are under a huge amount of pressure at the moment. They've had to deal with COVID and everything else. And, you know, there are legitimate reasons why some councils, possibly maybe smaller ones, might not have the expertise. So we in the DFT are working really closely to try and understand what are the barriers. We know it's actually not just about funding. It sometimes is about some of those other issues, but we do want to work with them. We know that some councils are doing a really good job and they're finding a way to get those charging sockets installed. But we're also we're thinking out of the box. We've just opened up another workplace charging scheme, which we hope will be very attractive to small businesses. So, for example, small B&Bs who are perhaps in rural areas. Previously, it was quite difficult for them to get funding to have a charge point. But of course, if people are driving to their cottage in Cornwall or something, they want to charge their car up when they get there. So we are looking all the time about how can we be innovative in this space and make sure that anybody, whether it's a village hall, a local pub, a car park, or a sort of council centre, can actually have a charge point where there's a need for it. So we very much hope that we're going to see a big expansion in this particular type of business installing sockets, and they can install up to 40 charging sockets for employees and fleets. So we think that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, it's really important that we get the levelling up right, isn't it? Because I can see that lovely picture of Westminster behind you. I'm sure it's a virtual background at the moment. But, you know, there's that terrible figure that is always there in my mind, that there are more charging points currently in Westminster than there are in the whole of the West Midlands. And it's how do you make sure that rural communities don't lose out?
I think that's a really good point. As a West Midlands MP, that's something that I'm extremely mindful of. So I've had a little bit of insight myself with my own local council. So we're a new town, Redditch. I mean, we're not particularly rural, we're not particularly urban, but we haven't actually taken advantage of the government scheme. So we're now starting to do that. But there are some barriers about just the administration, and a council that's not familiar with actually doing that work and applying for the grants. So it is about hand-holding for those councils. It's about providing a lot of support for them. I mean, it is absolutely incredibly frustrating. I mean, clearly Westminster Council, good for them. They've done a great job, and they've got the experience and know-how of how to do it. But we really must redouble our efforts to work with councils up and down the country so that they can provide the same experience to their residents, because the money's there. So it does need to be spent.
And what would you say to people watching this who are aware now of those pots of money that their council's got? What can they do to try and help their councils make use of that money?
Well, I think they can definitely raise awareness for a start. They can get in touch with their local council or their local MP and ask them, you know, why haven't you used this money to install charge points? Or I would like to see charge points in these areas. just work closely. You'll know the local need in your local area. You might be able to identify and also help some local businesses that you're aware of, and help and encourage them to apply for these schemes. And of course, there's always people here at DFT ready to help anybody.
Okay, I'm just going to try and squeeze a couple more in. Elizabeth Ferris has been in touch through social media. She would like to ask, have you considered disabled drivers in the planning? She said she's an active, independent paraplegic, but if she's driving alone, can she build her wheelchair beside the car when I park? Can I reach the charging point? There's really big issues. I know I'm having this conversation now on social media with several other people. So what are your plans for that?
Yeah, it's a massively important point, and I want to reassure her that we are looking at that in detail and looking at it very carefully. As I said, we've got the consultation that's open at the moment. We will be working with a number of groups who are representing people with mobility issues of all types. But I would also encourage anyone who's listening to this and thinking this is something they care about, please feed that into the consultation. It's something that I identified very early on in my role as a minister, about the whole accessibility piece and the experience of being at the charge point. Because when you go to a petrol station, you expect all this to have been taken into account when you're filling your tank. It should be the same with an EV charging point.
Going back to this race that we're in to 2030, what are the main things that you're focusing on at the moment? What are your big priorities for helping people with making that transition?
I think what we're doing today is a really important part of it. It's that education piece, helping people to think about what their life would be like if they had an electric vehicle, and then dealing with all those practical things that go with that. It's, first of all, have they got the right information? Can they make an informed decision? That plays into all the availability of grants, of company car tax benefits for people that are buying their cars through the company, of making it really easy for them to get the charging point installed at home if they're lucky enough to have space for that, and just making that process work really well and making it clear for people. But I think beyond that, it is about just sending the message that change is coming.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to being part of the conversation with you, talking now to consumers throughout this year and as we head towards COP26, and also getting the results of that survey. So, Minister, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ginny. I very much look forward to continuing to have a chat with you.
I'll talk to you next month.
Talk to you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.
And you can follow the Minister's monthly blog over on electrifying.com, where you'll also find a link to the UK government's open consultation on electric car charging. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for all the latest news and reviews of electric and hybrid cars.